Hello, my friends. Today I won't be solving tactics. I would like to cover one topic. I'm not quite sure if that will be of your interest or not. I think the views will show the actual state of the of the interest. So I wanted to try one more topic, which is looking at the classical games and analyzing classical games. It is really hard because there is a lot of them, and every single player, the great player of the past, actually is worth looking into. And I would just try to get somebody who was not really well known. This person was never the chess champion. And but saying that, I need to mention that he managed to win quite a lot of tournaments in his time. Uh, the name of this person is Akiba Rubinstein or Rubinstein. Uh, this guy was of like little Jewish family, born in Poland, which was sadly divided by Russia and some European countries. I think Austria and Persia at that time. The part of Poland that Akiba was living in belonged to Russia at that time. He was supposed to be going a religious way as his father, but I think he deviated and he started to play chess. Uh, Not a long time after he decided that, I think he started to win quite a lot of. I think his kind of grand entree was around the beginning of the 20th century. I believe that he participated in the 1907 tournament, which I am aware was like the first one that I at least know of. And immediately he kind of gained some glory of being really strong player, right? So before that, he participated in the Poland, I think Poland championships, or one of the cities there championship, Lodz, I think Lodz. But then he wanted to go to the international arena, and here he started to play in the Russian championships as well as some of the international tournaments, and he showed quite a tremendous play. Um, Rubinstein games are incredibly positional, but that saying that, I don't mean that he couldn't really do any combos. I urge you to look at the game which was classical. Basically, we cannot really cover all of the games because there will be probably dozens of them that I would like to go over. I have chosen only two games today, but I urge you to look at the game Rotlevi Rubinstein, which is the classical example of the Rubinstein's combinatory visions. Okay, it is just a brilliant combinatory game with a nice combo in the end. Um, Also, there are other games which I obviously wouldn't be able to cover in this video. Uh, Once Rubinstein went to the international arena, he won a lot of tournaments. Those days, there were quite a lot of tournaments played in San Sebastian and in Carlsbad. Currently it is the Czech Republic, so it is called Karlovy Vary at the moment. There were regular tournaments throughout the years. I think from 1907 in to 1923, I believe that was the last tournament in San Sebastian. So throughout those years, Rubinstein showed quite a lot of success playing the games. There were also some of the failures. Um, um, the later uh, life of Akiba showed some really annoying stuff. He started to have mental illness. obviously this kind of enormous tension, enormous like the mental tension during the game couldn't really could really I mean undermine your physical health, and that's what in my opinion happened to Akiba. He was probably taking the games too seriously. But one can say like, how else would you play stronger if you don't take it seriously, right? So that's my approach too. But you shouldn't really restrain your brain, and that's what probably a lot of work and a lot of play, a lot of no, kind of nervous tension, unfortunately affected his health. So around 1930, he quit from actual play, and he was actually put in the mental institute in Belgium. I think it was Antwerp. Um, Although he was there, he still watched games and he a little bit played himself without obviously restraining himself and so on. Uh, he lived quite a long life for that time. It was 80 years. He died in 1961, and he had two sons, which actually left some memories about his their father, mentioning that he was actually even watching the chess games of Botvinnik Smyslov championship. So he was still like in chess. Chess is like a disease, like Korchnoi. You can't really escape that. So once you felt this inner beauty and of this game, you will never abandon that. So even though he was having this mental problems, he still was watching the games because it was still of his interest. Right. So, and by the way, he's luckily escaped the Second World War. He was a Jew and he was in the occupied Belgium, but he was in a mental institute, and I believe that there was something happening there where people of Jewish origin were actually hidden there or taking other names or something, so they wouldn't be given away to Nazis. So he survived that one, which was really good. Uh, what about the Rubinstein's game style? There is a lot of different opinions on that, topic, and people would say like he was the first really great positional player. Other people say that he was just the god of the rook end games and so on. Um, a lot of different stuff is said about Rubinstein. The bottom line is he was a really strong player. Alexander Alekhine was actually considering him one of the candidates for the championship match with Capablanca at that time. But just giving you a little bit information about that time, in 1927, when Alekhine said that about possible competitors of Capablanca, there was no FIDE, and basically the champion set the rules on which you should challenge him. Capablanca set quite enormous requirements for the competitors who want to challenge him. He said that the prize fund should be 10,000 US dollars at that time. That sounds laughable now, but just for your information, the an average worker in the United States earned $37 per month at that time. So you can compare how much $10,000 would be. Okay, so it's quite an amount. So obviously, not a lot of competitors could find this money or find any sponsors to guarantee that prize fund. And of course, Rubinstein couldn't really do that. Although he was quite strong, and Alekhine actually mentioned that Rubinstein at that time had equal score with Capablanca. He couldn't really participate because of this enormous requirement for the prize fund. Alekhine was successful at finding that and playing their match in Buenos Aires, which he won. But for Rubinstein, that was um, no such luck. And also in 1927, he was already showing some of the signs of mental illness, which were expressed in social phobia. So he was, in general, a person who didn't really socialize a lot. Finally, that he's got only several, not even if just few games commented by himself. He was not he was not he hasn't lived any of this kind of thing where we could look at his thoughts. Only like few games that were commented by himself, right? So he was quite a modest person. There was actually mentioned that while he was playing the games, he on his opponent's move, he just stepped away and sat somewhere else, just not wanting to disturb the opponent, right? Uh, so, just going back to the Rubinstein style of play, um, talking about the rook end games, yes, I believe that Rubinstein had some kind of special grip on that end game. However, just in general, we know that the rook end games are the most common end games actually in overall, right? So if you look at other Rubinstein games, you would see that he equally uh, he played equally good the other end games like bishop end games, pawn end games, you name it, right? So it is not obviously just to the rook end games, but the peculiar stuff about rook end games is that uh, they have got a lot of the resources for defense. So that's why they were considered like more or less drawish. Rubinstein said, "Well, cool. You can, consider them as whatever you want. I know how to play that, and I know how to improve my position and win them." One of the games I want to show you is actually on the Rook and games. Um, well, basically two of them, in fact. Yeah, but we'll get to them. Okay. So, with regards to positional play, I want to mention that Rubinstein was actually a um, quite an innovative player. I know that it is really hard to say that he actually invented some of the schemes there, but one of the scheme that was used was the Rubinstein system in the French defense, where you take on e4 early. Another thing was that he proposed the play against Tarrasch defense, developing the bishop on g2. So black has got an isolated pawn on the d5, and therefore he uh, devised the system in depth how to actually use that particular detail weakness in the black's position in his advantage. So apart from that, there were other stuff like Rubinstein in the Queen's Gambit accepted. If I think it was the A4 system. It's called Rubinstein system. There were a lot more. So these guys were actually the pioneers of the chess theory at that time. And their input into the chess theory is just tremendous, right? Those days there were no computers, of course, so people needed to think themselves, and that's why we wouldn't be really judging them strongly on the opening theory, as you will see, because at that time opening theory was just like in the actually like a fetus, right? It was just like started to develop really to something that we've got today. Okay, I think it is enough said as a preface. Many people also like say that the Rubinstein is one of the uncrowned kings. But well, that's kind of debatable, right? Arguable. What the only thing I could say that he obviously was incredibly strong player and had much more profound understanding uh, of positional understanding than most of the players in his time. And saying that, I would also like to say that he didn't play a dance in every game. Players that he played against were actually really strong. They were quite strong masters at that time that won many tournaments as well. So it is not really, you know, it's to say that like, well, he won because he was not having any equal players at the time. No, it is just his positional understanding was much more profound than anybody else's at that time. Okay. All right, so there are two games that I wanted to show you today. I will go with the chronological order, and one of them was the a victory against the world chess champion at the time, which was Emmanuel Lasker. Okay, it is really a famous game, which are probably included in every chess books. This game was played in St. Petersburg in 1909. It was one of the first Rubinstein's tournaments. Okay. All right. So what I want to tell you that again, I don't want to judge those games too hard by their openings because again, openings at that time were just really developing. But we will obviously look into the mid game and the end game. Okay, Rubinstein plays white. He starts with d4. Lasker replies with d5. He plays knight f3. These days, this is the opening that easily transforms into the London system with bishop f4 and so on and so forth. Those days, people mostly played Queen's Gambit, either accepted or declined. One of the popular ones was the terrace defense actually. It is really hard to transform it from this particular move order, but Rubinstein played bishop to g5, and here Lasker replied with the immediate c5. That move doesn't really is not really considered the best these days, as you see that most of them suggest like h6, just going to transform into the regular Queen's Gambit declined positions. But at that time, again, well, that was just the move. These days, probably you wouldn't really create yourself an isolated pawn in the center without necessity, but those days that was seen as an acceptable way of play. Okay. See, he also takes on d4, developing the knight. Obviously, that would be probably better to just develop your pieces like bishop e6 or bishop e7 here, right, without giving white a tempo to develop the knight. Okay, playing there, ke3. By the way, here is an interesting moment which could have a combinatory, a little bit of a tactical, duel. So if white plays bishop takes f6 and queen takes f6, sorry, queen takes f6. If you try to go this way, being smart, uh, meaning that you're going to check on a c7, black goes taking on d4, you go check, the king goes away, and if you take on a8, you will get this really standard bishop b4, and you lose your queen. Okay, so just to be aware. So therefore, black played knight to e7, oops, bishop to b5, developing a bishop to d7. Now it is already obvious that black will lose the d5 pawn, right? Uh, so, but there is nothing else. I think if black doesn't play bishop d7 or keeping or like if black say played bishop to e6, right? Uh, the c6 square would be weak, right? So we will take, and it's obviously winning here. So he has to play bishop d7, in fact. Okay, forward. So Rubinstein took on f6, taking on f6, taking on d5. Okay, so here it looks like white wins a pawn, and it is a win of a pawn. But Lasker calculated as well that this variation as well, and he goes with taking on d4, taking on d4, and here we go. Queen to g5. He attacks the g2 pawn, he attacks the d5 knight, he also attacks the b5 bishop, right? What to do? Rubinstein pragmatically just takes on c6, bishop takes on c6. Still, there is a threat to take on g2. Rubinstein plays knight to e3. Note that g2 is actually protected, so black cannot really take that because there is a skewer, right? So the bishop on g2 is going to be lost. It's a poisoned pawn now. Okay, so he obviously doesn't do that. He castles long side. In theory, and even if you put the computer on, so I think the best move was to castle short side. It is much safer because whatever happened in the game, this long castling long brought the idea of starting to attack the enemy's king because there is this the c line is actually open. First Rubinstein castles, of course, your king's safety is coming first. Lasker centralizes his rooks. And here comes a really nice move which pins the bishop. Okay. Uh, Lasker underestimated that move because he played here rook takes e3. The threat is quite obvious. He wants to checkmate white. Okay. But Rubinstein has something in his sleeve, and that's why he played a rook to c1. And here again comes Rubinstein's combinatory vision as well, so because we needed to see that kind of continuation once you played, once you was like once you were two moves um, before. Okay, what he does, he takes on c6. Okay, cool bananas. So if you take on c6 with check, but it looks like black will be able to win this pawn, of course, because well, if you take here, then black takes on e3 with check, and it looks like the other pawn is going to be falling. So in fact, black would be pawn up. Okay, so let's see what's happened in the game. So Lasker took on c6, and Rubinstein didn't take on e3. What did he do? He pinned the rook. Note that rook doesn't have any escape square to protect the queen. e5 is not available, g3 is not available, so therefore this rook is going to be won at some point, right? Also, once Rubinstein pinned this rook, he aimed at c6. This is really, really interesting to see how Rubinstein plays those days, because it is just a tremendous combination of a tremendous mixture of positional and combinatory play. Like it is so his moves are so versatile. It's not like going something in incredible vision of the board. He's not going for something just for one thing. He also weaves his strategy in the plans into the position in many different ways. So that's what kind of astonishes me. Now, so once you pinned, what would you do? Okay, black doesn't want to be pawned down, so he takes on d5 at least, right? What's next? Rubinstein takes on e3 with the pawn. Everything goes with the tempo. If he had taken with the queen, takes queen takes queen takes, and then the rook goes to d2, right? White can obviously go and protect his pawns, but he will go check, and it looks like black would draw this game, even though he is no, the pawn is equal, but he can draw this game, right? So it is just, yeah, it is an equal end game afterwards. So of course Rubinstein doesn't want to. He wants to get the maximum of the position, and therefore he plays f takes e3. So the rook should go where to? Computer actually recommends here rook to d6. Okay, so after where were we? After d6, um, why this move was not considered? Because in fact, white is also doing really well after rook takes f7. Okay, so rook gets to the seventh rank, and it's gonna be quite disastrous for black as well, because his king is also um, open, and it will create a lot of combinatory attacks um, on the black's king. Okay, now Lasker played rook to d7, protecting the f7 pawn. He says like, well, cool, take that one, but I will keep all of the pawns intact on the king side. At least one pawn here wouldn't really make any sense, any difference. I might draw that game. Rubinstein takes on c6. King goes to d8. Another brilliant move. Rook to f4. Rook here, first of all, goes to the fourth rank, where it is much more mobile. Secondly, it protects the e3 pawn from being taken by the queen, and that's just, again, a really multitask move here. Now, interestingly, say if uh, the idea of this move is actually in the variation, uh, say a black makes some kind of interim move and it's still my turn, right? What would I do? Here comes queen to a8 check, and that's why rook actually stands on f4, because if king goes to e7, if rook was on f1, I wouldn't be able to check black from e1 because my pawn would be on the way. Okay, Rubinstein saw that one, and he went to f4 with the rook, from where rook can actually check the king, and it's going to be the king is going to be checkmated really soon here, or um, black will suffer some material losses. Okay, so let's just turn on the engine and see. But even without the engine, like, he's got not that many escape squares here, right? So once he goes either way, we can probably continue the attack in here by playing something like check here, then going back check. So black would not really survive here for sure. Okay, so what happened then? Lasker played f5 just to prevent this idea of checking on e4. How does Rubinstein play? He plays queen to c5. What he plans is he plans to check here and then include his rook into attack, and therefore the king will die. Okay, cool. Lasker prevents that, so he closes this diagonal. He doesn't say, he says like, well, you won't gonna give me any check in here, and also he is kind of aiming at the e3 pawn, as well as his rook is uh, just in case, stands on the open d file where it can participate in the attack if necessary. Rubinstein just pragmatically changes the queens. What is interesting about this game is that, or in general, um, currently white has one extra pawn. And probably when Lasker played to with the queen to e7, he thought like, I'll just offer my opponent to go to rook endgames. Rook endgames are famous for their drawing, chances. But he underestimated the Rubinstein's understanding of the position. He won't be able to survive that. King takes, he brings the king in the center. Here Rubinstein takes another pawn, so technically now white is 2 pawns up. Uh, Not for long, because black plays plays check on d2, king goes to f3, and he grabs one pawn, so he returns one pawn. White plays to a5, attacking, counter-attacking, which is really interesting again because Rubinstein defends his pawn and also attacks. Everything is just a tempo game. Brilliant. Rook returns to b7, otherwise the e7 pawn is hanging. Now look, Rubinstein's technique. Rook to a6. He prevents that pawn from moving. He restricts the enemy's king even more, so it is cut off on the 6th rank. It couldn't really go any further. Brilliant. King goes back. e4. Rook to c7. The rook is actually bound to the 7th rank, otherwise the pawn is gonna fall. Now look at Rubinstein's technique again in this moment. Um, Technically, you can just go with the pawn first, but not Rubinstein. If your opponent hasn't got any counterplay and just bound to go back and forth and here, why wouldn't you improve your other pieces' position, namely your pawns? If your pawns are advanced, you will get more space, right? And therefore, if you got more space, your opponent is more cramped. And if your opponent is more cramped, it's more likely that he will make a mistake, or the position will be so bad, it would be so bad that you can put him in the Zugzwang position. Okay, let's see how it goes. Well, black just maneuvers with the king. Now another pawn goes forward. The closer they are to the queening, that's better. Maneuvering with the king, king goes in. King just goes. Okay, so now the pawn structure on the king side is fixated, and therefore we need to do something else. King goes forward, centralizing your king for the maximum, right? Maximum centralization. King goes there, so he prevents the white's king to go to g6. The pawn goes in. So now black's king cannot really step anywhere because white's king infiltrates to g6. Okay, then the rook goes something like here. If black wants to protect the 8th rank, the rook goes to 7th rank instead. So technically the black's position is already lost. Clearly Lasker didn't expect that kind of technique from his opponent. Rook goes there, king goes there. Now there is an interesting moment where the moves were repeated. Okay, and Lasker himself deviated from the repetition of the moves. I believe that Rubinstein wouldn't really repeat the moves if Lasker played uh, king to what did he play? So it was just this way. Yeah, he wouldn't he wouldn't really play to e7 anymore. But it's strange that he first kind of didn't want to repeat the moves. Okay, now Rubinstein plays rook to c6 now. Okay, white is essential here because he wants to put black in the Zugzwang position. Rook here on the 7th rank doesn't have a lot of moves to go, and particularly uh, this rook on c6 deprives the black's rook from going to c7. Okay, so rook has less and less room here for maneuvers. King goes to f7, otherwise we infiltrate. And pawn goes to a3 and Lasker resigned. Interesting. Why? Because black is in Zugzwang position. Okay, this brilliant a3 moves actually you might say like, well, it is a waiting move. Yes, it is a waiting move, as well as taking b4 from the enemy's rook, where it could go if my king goes somewhere else. Okay, there is no more before uh, before square for the enemy's rook. Brilliant waiting move combined with the prophylactic move. It is just like that's the Rubinstein, right? That's how he played. Now the idea here is that the black is in the Zugzwang position, and I'll like just illustrate that. So if he goes to d7, you get forked. Not not good. Where else could you go? If your rook goes somewhere else, I will give you a check and then grab another pawn. That's going to be clearly winning for me. Okay, two pawns, two passed pawns here, definitely winning. What can you do then? So after e3, you can go to e7. and then comes check, and this is the winning. Because, well, first of all, you cannot really take, you need to step away. You cannot go to e8 because you're gonna be checkmated. Quite a funny checkmate. Now, if you go there, you will get check here, rook covers, and you are gladly going to the endgame. Taking here, getting there, and this is won. Therefore, after a3, Lasker resigned. Just a brilliant game, very technical from the point of the endgame. And how um, the whole pattern of this game is actually to go through the opening really quickly. It just passes by opening as if it didn't exist, goes to mid game, and mid game flows in the way that like you immediately just go change all the exchanges, and you go to the one end game. This kind of it's like a monolith. It is just like everything is so. It's like bricks in the wall. That's what how Rubinstein's moves are in this game. So it is entirely a kind of weaved into that kind of thing, and everything is like the whole, right? Everything, the game is like a whole thing, one big game, compound of all these moves. Uh, Among the players, I would say that only David Bronstein that actually had this capability of passing the opening stage to the mid game and quickly going to something that is already won without his opponent realizing that, as well as Bobby Fischer, because he had such a um, intuitive, um, such an intuition that he knew even without calculating that he will go to the winning endgame, whereas his opponent still kind of nourished some of the ideas of drawing miraculously against him. Okay, right. So that's what I've got. And bear in mind that Rubinstein was actually playing in the beginning of the 20th century, whereas the players like Bronstein and Bobby Fischer were already like the second half of that. So it is Bronstein started to play this way far earlier. Okay, that's what makes his games so adorable. All right. Okay, and the next thing I wanted to show you that it is probably not a really famous game, but it is also showing Rubinstein's rook and game technique. Okay, this is a game played against Karl Schlechter. Rubinstein played black, and the game was played in San Sebastian 1912. It was also one of the regular San Sebastian's tournaments at that time. Okay, what I will do is I will just quickly go through that through the opening. Again, opening is by the way, this is the opening of the French defense, which is called Rubinstein's system, and it is starting with taking on e4 early in the game. Okay, so black releases this tension, gets a really um, kind of passive but really strong position. Okay, passive but really hard to penetrate position. Let's just put it this way. Okay, this is all theory these days. Interestingly, this move, the I played a similar game some time ago, and I was afraid to go b6 because I thought that there is this combination that Schlechter wanted to show, but it is refuted. It is refuted by Rubinstein in this position. And after I saw this game, I said, like, "Well, my goodness! If I had only studied this game before, I would have known this idea." The idea of that move, knight to e5, it is exactly to prevent bishop to b7. But if once we look into the game, Rubinstein still played bishop b7. Why? In my opinion, the idea that bishop checks, c6, bishop takes, bishop takes, knight takes, queen d5 exclamation mark. This is the thing that actually refutes White's idea. Okay, why? Because you are attacking on g2, this bishop is going to be hanging, the knight is hanging, everything is hanging, and yeah, black's position is really, really good. Also, just to mention that, well, obviously taking with the knight here wouldn't really help either because of the same very move to d5. Okay, you can give me the discover check, but that's all good. I don't really care. I'll take with the king. Your bishop here is hanging. Your pawn on g2 is hanging, so you have nothing but to go back with your bishop, right? But then we will have a lot of stuff here to collect. Okay, so really interesting kind of trick in this um, um, particular system, right? So as we saw, uh, Schlechter played taking on c6 with the bishop. Rubinstein took. He took queen to d5. Schlechter moved back to e5. Okay, fair enough. He protected his bishop, but g2 pawn is falling. Here, this is a common idea in some of the openings where you give away a pawn, but then you just get with your queen and protect throughout the attacker your rook. Um, but in this case, in fact, your pawn structure is going to be quite compromised. And look again, Rubinstein doesn't really avoid changing queens where he can go to a favorable endgame. He takes, rook goes to c1 with tempo because the c2 pawn needed is required to be defended. Schlechter, being a really active player, in fact, probably feels uncomfortable playing without the queens. And here he still tries to make a really active move, whereas probably simple c3 would be better. Okay, because you don't want to get your king away from the center in the endgame. Probably the better disposition would be to put your king in the center, connecting the rooks. Okay, but he played long, castling long. Okay, knight to d5. Look, Rubinstein changes the pieces, but with this exchange he centralizes his king as well. It's really interesting. Again, it is a very really multitasking move in here. Okay, so he actually thought through all of his moves. What for? Because there was the idea of getting here and attacking to a2 as well. Okay, now again, once you castled, this is the thing that you are forced to waste more tempi here because the pawns might get under attack, right? And the king is actually getting far away from the center, which is going to be also crucial in the endgame. Cool bananas. Rubinstein just centralizes the pieces. Both of his rooks are standing on the open files now. Look, that's the whole beauty of those games because players like Rubinstein, they didn't reinvent the wheel. They applied the well-known principles where rooks should be standing in the center, where rooks should be standing on the open files. So he just, applies all of these rules just naturally. Whereas white does some kind of artificial maneuvering, in my opinion, just for no good reason, in fact. And Rubinstein just plays really simply and practically and applies just exactly the chess principles in here. Okay, that's the whole beauty. Why studying those classical games is really important? You will see the actual plans of the players. The thing that his opponents here, like for example, didn't really show the good resistance even better because you will see how brilliantly he capitalizes on the opponent's errors and how he converts his advantage, in fact. bear in mind that his opponents like Karl Schlechter were not really again somebody like from the street, right? They were famous and strong masters at that time that were winning a lot of interesting in different games. Schlechter was particularly known for his attacking style, right? So again, beautiful, just pure principles like crystallized in here. Okay, Schlechter also tries to play actively, attacking on g6. Cool. Um, Rubinstein predicts that. The knight goes to seemingly like really active position here. Okay. Rubinstein plays to b4. His idea is to attack on um, c2. What I want to mention again here is that Rubinstein didn't play flawlessly. Okay, so his idea here, if you look at the computer's suggestion, is having a flaw because it's just a waste of tempo here. In fact, okay. The other thing is that he had a plan. Um, not a bad plan. In fact, he wanted to exchange the knight. Technically, the better one was just to play f6 in here. Rubinstein was probably concerned that the e6 was getting a little bit weaker, and once he played this way, computer would probably show you that there was some advantage for black and quite a significant one. But that's not what Rubinstein wanted to perform in this game. Okay, his idea, in fact, playing uh, bishop to knight to b4, not only to attack the pawn but to relocate the bishop, to relocate the gosh, to relocate the knight. We will see c3, knight to c6. What does he want? He wants to exchange the knights to go to the rook endgame. Here probably Schlechter said like, well, cool, I will just take you here, right? By the way, not taking would be probably not good either because then black could just perform this pawn break here. I'm not sure, but um, yeah, that's not too clear. Even though, well, look, stepping back is not always a good thing. Maybe he could go to d3 as well. So I'm not quite sure. Black would probably stick to his plan as well as it happened in the game, like rook d5 and then just attacking those weak pawns as well. Okay, but Schlechter kind of um, goes towards whatever Rubinstein wants. Taking c6, rook to d3. Also kind of pseudo-active move, trying to go to the third rank and show some kind of activity attacking those pawns, but those pawns are well protected. Whereas white's pawns on h2 and f2 are going to become an objects for attack really soon. Rook to d5. Look, nothing really. No secrets, no miracle. Just centralizing your rook. Simple. Going there, no worries. h5, rook to h3. Here probably was better to go to e3, but again it is just, yeah, the pawn on f2 is gonna be hanging and so on. By the way, I think a long time ago I analyzed this position and the computer said like, well, actually white is holding, okay, even though those two pawns are weak, you still can relocate your rook somehow. I don't remember exactly, but I but the position was holdable, right? So white could hold this position. It was not really like 100% losing. It was hard, but it was holdable. Okay. Now rook to f3. What does white do? Oh, what does black do? Sorry. He opens the files for his rooks to get to the second rank. Brilliant. Just brilliant. Taking, taking here. Now, again, in this position, Schlechter say is played not in a good way, in fact. But the position, as far as I remember, was already like -2 for black. So it's quite a hard position for white to defend. He played to change a pair of rooks. What does Rubinstein do? Cool bananas, I'll take that. You will still have two weak pawns which I'm going to attack. My pawns, on the other hand, have a really nice structure. It is easily defendable. It is all of my infantry is marching towards you in a row, like it's really intimidating and really effective and efficient. So cool, taking, immediately attacking the pawn. There is no other way to defend it by just to go here or there. Either of those moves is actually equal, but White's position is no better. Going there. Uh, Schlechter probably wanted to place his rook into here just to protect that pawn, and so that's what happened in the game. What does Rubinstein do? Of course, he's relocating. He's trying to get into the second rank. Schlechter protects. Rubinstein just starts to centralize his king. Everything is just simple, guys. Chess is a simple game. C4. Now, Schlechter realizes that if Black's king marches towards the e pawn, and if Black wins that pawn, uh, that's it, finita. White is gonna lose. So he tries his last chance. He tries to create a passer on the queen side. That's doesn't have any effect really because black is much more centralized, his rook is active, and his pawns are easily defendable. Also, even hypothetically, if white creates a passer here, I believe that black is going to be much faster at creating something in here. So, centralizing your king even more. Schlechter goes with his plan to create a passer. What does Rubinstein do? He goes and creates his passer, of course. Okay, forward. Here we go. The passer is going to be created. Rubinstein doesn't really care. He will get his passer. And the problem here is that the rook can easily defend against the white's passer here. Even if necessary, he could sacrifice the rook for the passer. But his passer here, actually it's going to be two pass pawns after a while, are going to be much stronger than the enemy's rook. Okay? So the rook starts to feel something is fishy going on, attacking the g4. What do? You just protect the pawn. King goes forward. Now Schlechter is already abandoning that pawn because he wants to create some counterplay on the king side, on the queen side, sorry. But that doesn't really help because, well, look, once one thing falls, everything is following up, right? In the bad position, there could not be good moves. Rubinstein creates the pass pawn. Cool. So now this rook is bound to guard that passer, right? In the what is the worst for white? That the enemy's king is easily going in and protects that pawn as well as threatens the rook. So the appearing, the passer appears here and the queen's. It's just a matter of time. King goes forward, not to give any counterplay to the opponent, just going and taking on c5. He takes on c5, and king just goes to f3. So therefore, the king and the queen is the rook is attacked. It needs to step back. Then the king follows, and then the passer goes, and we win a um, a rook. Okay, this pawn is threatened to go in, but look Rubinstein how Rubinstein treats the situation. Okay, so we get there. The rook goes away, and now what? Brilliant. A6 check. The king should go away. Without the king, the pawn is not going to pass anywhere. Okay, so this pawn is nicely treated. Okay, if the king goes there and there, cool, but it's like two tempi here. I am threatened to take your rook with one tempo. Okay, and once I do that, if the rook goes, I'm gonna go and promote my pawn. if you go there, you haven't even started to move your pawns. I'm going to queen here, take you here, and then I'm going to go back and collect that pawn, after which I am going to get that one moving. But even without that, I believe that it's actually really, it's actually taking some chances in here. In fact, I believe that rook g1, after this check, he goes there, for example, right? Uh, I could even take one more pawn in here. Okay, cool bananas. So you go there. Well, good luck going there. Taking, taking, going with another pawn. And here, two of those pawns are going to be much stronger because I'm going to queen first for sure. Okay, let's just see if the engine works this time. I don't know. But if he goes and tries to click that pawn, I'm going forward. He just goes somewhere. I'm going forward, taking pawn, queening, taking, taking. See, I'm queening much faster. Therefore, after playing a6 check, Schlechter resigned. Brilliant game. Uh, in fact, um, that position in the rook endgame was equal to the time where Schlechter started to go nuts and just making moves out of general suggestion or trying to exchange the rooks and so on. Every exchange in the Rubinstein game, it comes with the gain, so he is gaining something once the piece is going off the board. And here, once he aimed towards the rook end game, every single move there was just the kind of underline the chess principles, going the rooks to the open file, centralizing the rooks, changing the rooks, creating two weaknesses for the opponent, then getting there, centralizing your king, getting the passed pawn, getting with your king even closer, stopping the enemy's counterplay. Just brilliant. Everything is like a part of one big plan for Rubinstein. Okay. Um, so here we go. Hey Nadav, uh, thank you, but I won't play today. Probably, my purpose here was just to show the one of the possible ways of streaming on Twitch. One of them was to comment classical games. Here I published some of the Rubinstein, Akiba Rubinstein games to just to see how it is gonna be going. Um, I can probably create one more stream tomorrow. I will definitely do one more stream tomorrow, probably a little bit earlier, and I will plan to go and solve tactics and play if necessary. Today I'm not going to play. I was just to show and come in some of the classical games. Okay, sorry about that. All right. So, guys, I hope you enjoyed that one. I will see how you react, how many views are on that kind of classical game commenting. Um, Also, I just wanted to say that there are a lot of players that played really strongly in their time, and on their games we can actually learn a lot. Okay, here is one perfect example of Akiba Rubinstein games, especially um, Rook N games, but also equally the plans in the mid game and so on. So I believe that studying classical games actually pays off big time. Okay, thank you for watching, and I think I will finish for today. I really welcome everybody. Thank you everybody who was watching. Thank you everybody who will be watching this stream in record, and I will see you next time. I hope you enjoyed. Take care.